Polytechnic, talking to Brigadier Cripps of Chagford, Devon. Brigadier Cripps being a veteran of the Western Front for nearly 3 years, and then an RFC veteran. I'd like you first of all, Brigadier, please to tell me when you were born and something of your family background before the First World War.
Well, I was born on the 15th of June 1896 in Winterford near Bristol, and we were 7 children. I was one from the bottom, and we lived in a very fine old house called Winterford Manor. Very unfortunately, my mother died when I was 2, and then when I was 9, my father died.
What had your father been? What?
We had in those days some iron ore mines about 10 miles south of Bristol, and they are still worked to this day, and he was the manager of the mines. And they worked, and the iron ore was chiefly made into red ochre paint.
Where did you go to school?
I was sent to school when my father died. An uncle who lived in Clifton, Bristol, took the 7 children and installed us in a house in Clifton, Bristol. And he was our guardian, but he didn't live with us. We lived by ourselves and had sundry housekeepers. We didn't last very long because the 7 children were somewhat unruly. But we had a very happy sort of family party.
Did
and
you
I went to Clifton College, and I went into the preparatory school, later to the junior school, and then became a boarder in the senior school. And I was there really when the war broke out in August 14.
Have you any recollections of the influences on your mind as you were growing up, either the newspapers in your house or the manner in which any particular teachers had prepared you for?
Well, in Clifton, we had 3 sides. We had a classical side, a modern side, and a military side. And I was on the military side, so I was really destined for the army. My guardian thought I should go into the army. And so I was on the military side, and really, in a way, prepared for taking the then entrance exam for Sandhurst. But when it came to the event, I didn't take any exam. I was merely nominated by the headmaster to go to Sandhurst without an exam.
When you had your OTC, your core days and your exercises and this sort of thing, was in the training there any tacitly or even explicitly expressed understanding that the enemy in your manoeuvres was the Germans?
No, not at all. We were in armed corps training. We all sort of worked to get what we called Certificate A, and that was a sort of diploma you got in the OTC. And I got my Certificate A fairly early. But it being rather of an idle nature, I joined the band. And as I told your wife yesterday, I played every instrument in the band and eventually became its drum major.
For which your physique no doubt fitted you.
Yeah. I used to wear leopard skin and carried the big drum.
And your pastimes and recreations before the war?
My father, who was a keen fisherman, had made at the iron ore mines. There were a series of mill pools, and they were stocked with trout. And when I was 9, I was taken by a cousin and started my fishing career. And I used to fish at bicycle out from Bristol 10 miles and fish, and bicycle back 10 miles. And that was sort of my recreation in the Easter and summer holidays. And I taught myself to play golf. In those days it was free on Clifton Downs. You could play golf on Clifton Downs without any fiat whatsoever.
Did the orientation towards a military career preclude any interest you might have had in politics?
Oh, I think so, yes. I mean, in those days, I don't think a schoolboy had many ideas of politics at all.
Well, they may have had ideas, but perhaps not very soundly based.
No.
Did you have interest at all in this field? Were you aware of the controversies which were raging over Ireland or over home rule, or the reform of the House of Lords?
No.
Well,
Not
then
all.
let's come to August 1914. You were on holiday.
I went on holiday to Devon, and I was actually playing golf when a telegraph boy ran across the golf course with a telegram from the headmaster saying I was to report immediately to Sandhurst.
Whereas you had been going to have another term
At school, yes. And so I went to Sandhurst, and I went there and started the military training.
How long did you stay at Sandhurst?
3 months.
This was shorter than the normal term.
Oh, the normal term was 2 years.
Yes.
I did 3 months. Everybody who was promoted to be a non-commissioned rank was automatically sent away after 3 months. And I became a corporal, so I was sent away after 3 months. And we were allowed to choose 3 regiments, or any regiment you'd like to be posted to. And I think I remember I chose the Gloucesters, the Somersets and the Devons, and found myself posted to the Welsh regiment.
But in this Welsh regiment, there were to be some men who would be distinguished in at least the literary field. Robert Graves, was he in when you...
No, he wasn't. No, Robert Graves, he was a Royal Welsh Fusilier.
Yes, that's right.
But we had suffered such enormous casualties at Gillivelt on
Yes.
31st of October 1914.
Yes.
The regiment was practically annihilated. And so that's why I finished up in that regiment to replace the losses.
I see.
And then we had a most disastrous battle of Aubers Ridge. We were annihilated again, and so we were made up with a lot of extra officers, including Robert Graves, and several Welsh Fusiliers, and several people from the Border Regiment were sent to us because we were down and out.
Well, I've led you to anticipate events, so let's move back to, you're telling me something about the training at Sandhurst.
The training at Sandhurst, we did fortifications, field fortification, we dug trenches, we did quite a lot of assault corps over obstacles and whatnot, musketry, and of course at Sandhurst we did the tremendous amount of square bashing, drill, but no field training.
I was going to ask you, can you dispassionately say the degree of relevance that this training had to the experience of war on the Western Front in 1915?
None at all. The only thing that was at all useful was the actual digging the trenches. We were taught to dig trenches like the one that we actually occupied later on. There were trenches dug, revetted with sandbags, duckboards, and that was the only thing we did.
In what way might the training have been more useful?
Well, I think the training, as the war developed into trench warfare, there was very little military training of any value which we could have had.
Yes, yes.
It was, trench warfare required really no military training whatsoever. Except training to endure hardships.
Well, whereabouts did you do your training once you'd left Sandhurst? Did you go straight out to France?
I went to Cardiff Castle, which was the Special Reserve Battalion of the Welsh Regiment, which was actually in Cardiff Castle, which was Marquis of Bute's sort of stately home.
Yes.
We were there, and I was only there 2 months, and during that 2 months I did no training whatsoever.
What rank were you then?
Second lieutenant. And then from the Special Reserve Battalion was the battalion which found the draft to make up the strength of the regular battalions overseas. And early in January 1915, I was ordered to take a draft, I remember about 50 men, to France and join the 2nd Battalion of the Welsh Regiment, which was in the 1st Division in France.
With what feelings did you greet this news? I suppose you were anxious to know of it.
The feeling in those days was that the war was of this very short duration. Unless you were jolly quick, you'd miss it.
Yes.
That was the sort of general feeling about everybody. Oh, the war was a very short one. If you want to see active service, you have to get there quickly. And so one went there with a good deal of enthusiasm.
And which part of the line were you drafted to?
I went to Havre, and we went up in the troop train with in the ordinary cattle trucks
horses and 40
to
men.
Béthune. And Béthune, I had to walk to a village which was about 5-6 miles away. And we were on the Béthune's sector at Givenchy. And we were there and went into the line, first of all, at a place called Festival.
Now, your first experience of seeing casualties, of actually being under fire yourself, and also being in command, admittedly of the smallest possible unit, but you were in a degree of command. How did your emotions cope with this?
Well, of course, I mean, as I was only 18, one was extremely green, really. I mean, but you were allotted a batman, and when you joined a platoon, because you joined a platoon which had been there, some of it had been there several months.
And they would be conscious that you were green too.
And they were conscious you were very, very young and green, and they really mothered you. And I felt I was mothered, you see. My batman couldn't have done enough to see that I was made comfortable. But we joined a terrible section of the line, which was practically underwater all the time, and we were soaking wet. But because you lived with the men entirely. I mean, there was the platoon commander was there. He mucked in with his men all day long, and they all sort of looked after their officer. And if they had a brazier, I was always.
You'd be young Mr. Cripps.
Huh?
You'd be young Mr. Cripps.
Yeah, Mr. Cripps, yeah. And my batman was always doing his best to scrounge food for me, extra food. And there was a tremendous sort of young officer was treated by his men, not only with respect, but as affection.
Yes.
And my platoon were extremely good to me, I thought. And also they were extremely careful that I didn't run any unnecessary risks.
And the first time you actually came under fire?
Well, the first time we went into the line, if I remember, we had no casualties at all, though we came under fire, but the fire was more or less ineffective. I mean, we were shelled occasionally, but it was a very quiet sector of the line. And we didn't really come under fire until next month when we went to Neuve-Chapelle. And Neuve-Chapelle, we first came under fire, and the first time I saw large numbers of dead and wounded men. And
you were to what part did your men play in the Battle of Neuve-Chapelle?
Well, we were only in reserve at the Battle of Neuve-Chapelle, so we only played no part except burying the dead.
Were you the reserves that were not called in time?
We weren't called in time at all. We didn't take part in the battle.
Can you tell me about this, please?
Well, the dead were buried in mass graves. Each man was wrapped in a blanket, and I, as a subaltern who buried them, had to collect identity discs and search their belongings for their pay books. And we had a mass grave of British soldiers, we had a mass grave of Indian soldiers who were chiefly Gurkhas and Sikhs. And that was really the only part we played in the Battle of Chapelle. We then went.
Did the sheer numbers involved numb you to this, or were there any particular instances which really brought the reality of war to this young man quite cruelly?
Well, it was. I'd never before that ever seen anybody dead. But then you saw. It was quite a shock to see people badly mutilated. People without their legs and people with their heads blown off. It was, as a young boy, it was a sort of a shock. But one soon got sort of completely inured to it. It was a matter of course. And then when we went into the line, soon after the in Chapelle, and there we were about 500 yards between the trenches, and in between the trenches there were large numbers, chiefly of Indian soldiers' corpses. And of course, after several days, it became extremely offensive. And one of our tasks in the trenches was to go out at night and sort of gradually clear the area of dead men. And it was rather a revolting task that we had to do. But the trenches were about 500 yards apart, and except for the odd sniping, there was very little offensive action from the enemy at all. We had very little offensive action from our own side. We just almost lived at peace.
When you went out on these tasks and the flare went up in the air, I know that you had to freeze, but did this mean also getting down on the ground, or did you stand where you were?
I used to lie on the ground, because one always felt to see that if you stood up, you were perfectly visible in the flare, and they would open fire straight away. But as soon as the flare went up, we used to lie doggo on the ground.
Yes.
And
was the nervous tension of this sort of work and wiring as well very much a strain?
Oh no, it was taken completely as a matter of course. The wiring party used to go out and
out from a sap. From a sap.
No, I used to just go over the top.
Over the top.
Yeah, you know, just climb over the trench, go out in front. And I think, as I said in my letter to you, that our wire was a very insignificant wire compared to what the Germans put up. The Germans had say 20 or 30 yards of this tightest barbed wire in front of their trenches, and we had 2 or 3 strands of ordinary wire in front of ours, because I think the thing was, as he considered that we were always on the offensive, and it would be bad for morale to be fenced in by this type of barbed wire.
And of course, pertinent to your own career too, in the RFC, the same sort of thinking deprived RFC pilots of having parachutes when they
yes, they thought to see that if you had a parachute, you might jump out of your machine if you were attacked, which would be expensive in machines. The only people who had the parachute were the balloons, the kite balloons.
Yes. When was the first time that either in a raid or in an attack you had the nerve-wracking experience, either as an officer in charge of some men, of having the lanyard and on the end of a whistle and looking at your own watch, or looking at somebody, a more senior officer, and having these minutes tick away before you went across with quite a good deal of equipment into an attack?
Well, the first one was Aubers Ridge. And at Aubers Ridge, the lines were very close together, about 150 yards apart. And as it was a very waterlogged area, there were big breastworks above ground, all made of sandbags. And when the attack was going to be launched, there was a preliminary bombardment, and the front-line trench was literally packed with people ready for the assault, all crouching down behind the sandbags. And the preliminary bombardment started, and in those days it was chiefly of shrapnel, because we had very little high explosive shells available. And so the preliminary bombardment against the German breastwork was mainly done by shrapnel, and you waited for the 0 hour, all packed together, for a whistle to be blown. But on this occasion, at Aubers Ridge, during the night, the engineers had put wooden footbridges across the stream which separated the two lines. There was a stream sort of halfway between the lines, and which was more or less unjumpable, and the one engineer had gone out in the dark and put white footbridges across. And then as soon as the whistle went, everybody jumped over the top, whereupon they met a withering fire, and people just, as they climbed over the top, most of them fell back again, shot. I jumped over the top, luckily, in between two bridges. And I ran between two bridges. By the time I got to the river, there was nobody there, practically nobody left alive outside of me. So I jumped into the water. And luckily it had fairly high banks, and there I was in the water. And I stayed in the water all day. And quite a lot of people wounded were in the water as well. And we did what we could to prop their heads above the water. And during the day...
How broad is the stream?
It was about, I think about 15 feet, I think. About 15
Depth?
feet. What?
Depth?
Depth about 4 feet. And luckily it had a bank about 2 foot. And I was in there all day. And so I was...
As you talk about this, it's 57 years ago. With what, if you shut your eyes, with what degree of clarity can you see these things happening? Can you feel the wetness of the water and the smell?
Well,
Does it seem a long time ago?
It was a long time ago, but I can remember every detail of that day. When I had to think what I was going to do. I mean, there I was in the water, with about 20 or 30 men still alive. And it was, I mean, if I knew to get back again was quite impossible. I would be shot straight away. And I had to think of a way to get back. And so I set these 30 men to dig a little sort of sap back from the river back to our lines again. So we spent all the afternoon and the morning, most of the morning, digging the sap. And then during the morning, I thought that I could jump up just by myself and run quickly and jump over the original barricade to say what I was doing. You see? So I did that quickly, and I wasn't shot. So
How far had you gone?
Huh?
How far?
I'd gone about, I suppose, about 70 yards, which I did at record time, I think. I jumped over the parapet, and I reported to my CO, and I said, well, I had still got about 30 men alive in the stream, and I would do my best to dig their way back. And so then I jumped over the trench again and ran back into the stream and stayed there till about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when a message was thrown to me from my original line to say that the attack was going to be resumed at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And another wave would come over. But in actual fact, that was cancelled. Nothing ever happened at all. I mean, no other attack wasn't resumed at all. And by soon after 5 o'clock, my little sap got back to the original line. And all the wounded were, and the survivors got back to... But I was the only surviving officer of those forward companies. Every other officer was killed. And that night we were taken out of the line and had about a 15-mile march after all that I'd done during that day, and I was somewhat exhausted.
Now, you were, apart from being an officer, not that I'm suggesting this is a contradiction in terms, but you were an intelligent young man, and surely you must have been forcibly impressed or depressed at the methods that you were being ordered to adopt to overcome the problem of a trench warfare stalemate. Did this in any way disturb you or not?
No, well, I think as a result of Aubers Ridge, I mean, one felt that the whole idea had been completely futile. I mean, that you cannot destroy enemy fortifications with shrapnel. It was quite impossible. And that the shrapnel didn't even cut the German wire. So, I mean, even if we'd got over the river, we'd never got through the wire alive. For that battle, we thought the whole conduct of the battle had been completely hopeless.
But basically, Brigadier, was Loos, or indeed was the Somme, except in scale, any different?
Yes, it was. You see, because one always entered the next big offensive with supreme optimism. And the thing, that was our next thing, Loos. You see, at Loos, we were told, you see, that instead of having, say, 40 minutes bombardment, by Loos, which happened to be the end of September, we had accumulated a tremendous amount of high explosive ammunition. And also we had, for the first time, decided to use chlorine gas. And we were told that these, for instance, the bombardment wasn't going to be just 40 minutes, it was going to be a week. And so for a week, the German lines were pounded by high explosive from I don't know how many in actual numbers, but from a very large, I mean the biggest bombardment the British Army had ever put on. And we, sort of being optimists, thought to see that this would be effective. And every day as the bombardment went on, our optimism rose and rose. And of course we were told to see that the chlorine gas would be a surprise to the enemy.
You weren't told anything about shifting winds?
No, we installed the gas. We installed the chlorine gas ourselves.
Yes, I know.
We were the chaps to put it there. You see? We worked like blacks. I mean, carrying up these enormous cylinders night after night to install them. And then, you see, when the battle started, we thought, you see, that the week's bombardment would have damaged or destroyed the German defences. But in actual fact, of course, it hardly scratched them, because it was on chalk country, and the Germans had constructed the deepest underground dugouts in the chalk, which no high explosive shell would even sort of worry at all.
And in fact, the wind.
And then, you see, we were my particular. I was then the signal officer of the battalion, and we were several hundred yards behind the actual assault line, and at dawn, which was a wonderful September day, a beautiful day like today, a beautiful day, no wind whatsoever, and we were told that the wind would be light and westerly. And at 0 hour, which as far as I remember was about dawn, we saw this green cloud suddenly emerge from our trenches, roll majestically up the hill toward the German trenches, which were on higher ground, and then suddenly the whole green cloud rolled back again down the hill over our own lines. And then the advance started, and that's the first time I saw large numbers of gas casualties, which were our own men. A tremendous lot of the assaulting troops were gassed before they ever started, by our own gas.
They had some elementary gas masks, didn't they?
We had PH helmets, yes, which were a sort of flannelette helmet, soaked in hypo solution, with a rubber tube in your mouth. It had to breathe. But it was an extremely uncomfortable thing, gas mask. And unfortunately, the troops hadn't been sort of really well trained in their use, and it had the feeling of being suffocated. And when that chlorine gas rolled back all over them, I think most of them panicked and took the respirators off, and the very few breaths of deep chlorine was disastrous. And a tremendous lot of them were gassed by our own gas.
How did these gas casualties look?
Terrible, green in the face. Horrible, and being terribly sick. But I knew, being a reasonably intelligent young officer, I realized that it was absolutely essential to keep your gas mask on, however uncomfortable it was. So I walked through the cloud with my gas mask on and emerged from the other side intact. And my men with me, I made them keep those on. And we got through the gas cloud quite happily. And then the advance, we came under fire straight away from the German trenches, which hadn't been captured at all. Because the troops, as I say, most of them were gassed before they could even start the assault. But on the left of our attack had been fairly successful. And so we bypassed the German trenches, and I was coming along with battalion headquarters, and then I saw the most magnificent sight was the Royal Horse Artillery galloping into action, firing over open sights against the remaining trenches on top of the hill. But as I walked along with my signallers, I suddenly met a German officer with a white flag. And he said, "Oh," he spoke English, and he said he wanted to surrender. There was about 150 men, is he? And so I was only a signaller, but I said, "Well, take me to your headquarters, and I'll come along." So I went along with him. I went into the German trench, and the Germans, there were about 150 of them, offered me wine and a cigar, and I only had about a dozen signallers with me, and I couldn't stop. So I merely told them, I said, told them to form up, and walk down the road toward the little village called Vermel, which they promptly did. They picked up all their kit and so on and started to walk without any escort whatsoever. They walked straight down the road to give themselves up. And I walked on with my signallers, and we got to a crest line which looking down toward the German reserve line, which was in front of a village called Hullock. And there it was getting dark. We were only on occasional sort of long-range sniper fire, that's all. And we settled down for the night. And then during the night, we heard a tremendous lot of sort of movement going on, and two new army divisions which had been in reserve came up to carry on the attack next morning. And these reinforcements deployed in the dark and lay down on the open ground in long serried ranks, all with their greatcoats on, packs on their backs. And then during the night we received orders we were to take part in the further attack on the left of this new army group. There were two new army divisions. I can't remember the numbers of them. When daylight suddenly came, we saw an amazing sight. We saw on our right thousands of men all in line upon line, lying down on the ground, ready to advance. And we started to advance with them. And we weren't under fire at all. And we advanced steadily into a sort of amphitheatre with a German reserve line on the crest of the hill in front of us. And it was like going into a half moon. And my battalion headquarters, I was being signal officer. My CO told me to go down as far as the Loos Hullock Road, and there he would go on with the battalion and come back to me later on And so I established my signallers down on the road. We had a cable to brigade headquarters, and so I witnessed subsequent terrible events. The line upon line of this new army of 2 divisions advanced steadily up into the half circle toward the German line on the crest. And it was quite a way. I mean, it was, I should say, 1,000 yards or more. And then, unfortunately, the German wire was very, very tough at the top of it. And as the troops moved into the circle, they gradually converged into a sort of mass at the top of the circle. They couldn't get through the wire, and they thought, you see, that they'd eventually get to it at the crest of the circle. And then, unfortunately, what started, one will never know, but sudden panic set in amongst these people. And the next moment, you see, they were, instead of advancing, these thousands of men turned around and ran for lives, throwing everything away, their rifles, their kit, their greatcoats, everything. They streamed past me, they couldn't stop them, and they disappeared out of sight over the crest of the hill where we'd just come from. And so I was left with just my little, I collected a few odd people of all kinds of regiments to make some sort of line. And I never saw the rest of my battalion again. I mean, the complete battalion headquarters were never seen again. And the whole ground was littered with equipment. And then the German reinforcements came up, and they started shooting, and there were quite a lot of casualties all around me on the ground. And peace really reigned all the rest of that afternoon. And about the middle of the afternoon, I had some stretcher bearers with me. A German officer came up to me and said that he would give us to midnight to clear all the wounded we could. Provided we didn't advance, they wouldn't advance. And we could clear up to midnight, as far as the Loos road. And so we couldn't, I mean, the battalion stretcher bearers were very, very, very few and far between.
How was he able to approach you without coming under fire?
Well, that's all we had. I mean, I saw the chap with the white flag walking towards me. And so we let him come talk to us, and he came and talked to me, and I said, well, it's very good of him, and we would do our best to clear the battlefield, you see? And we did what we could to midnight. And at midnight, the war started again, really. I mean, all that time there was no shooting whatsoever for anybody.
Which units had been these who broke? Which units had been these that broke on getting to the coast? There were 2 whole divisions. There were thousands of men. Not just a unit. What were the repercussions of that?
Well, a panic like that could only be arrested by the cavalry. And I believe our divisional cavalry rounded up these fugitives and sort of tried to allay their fears, and then they were taken away and retrained and reorganized.
Yes, you don't know any details about it, though.
No, I don't know what the official history said. I don't know. That's all I saw. And then
the numbers of these divisions, you don't know the numbers.
No, one could find that from official history. I don't know.
Yes, and it was up to the crest of which hill? Up to the crest of the Loos-Hullock Road.
They went beyond the Loos-Hullock Road up to the German reserve line, which was east of the road.
Yes, I see.
But there were 2 crest lines.
Yes.
And in the dip in the middle was the Loos-Hullock Road.
Yes, and the wire was at the top of the eastern crest line.
Oh, yes. But the Germans did hold parts of Hullock, which was on the point of this sort of half moon, and most of the firing that came during the advance of these 2 new divisions came from Hullock.
What explanation do you advance for the failure of Loos then?
Well, the branch of the failure, I mean, the reason of the failure was that these troops had never seen action before. It was middle of September, it was a hot day. They did a forced march up to the front. They went into action on the ground they'd never seen before. They were overburdened with kit, with greatcoats, their packs, everything. And it was asking the impossible of these new army divisions to go into an attack.
So to repeat what I said to you before, that you were asked to do the impossible at Aubers Ridge, men were asked to do the impossible at Loos, and I don't think that we would dispute that they were certainly asked to do the impossible on the Somme. Did you not feel troubled at the direction of the war on the Western Front? As a young officer?
Yes, as a young officer one felt, you hardly ever saw your superior officers, ever. I mean, your divisional commander and your brigade commander.
Which division were you in?
The 1st Division.
Who was in command of that?
Oh, I couldn't remember now who was the 1st Division commander, but they were nebulous figures. You never, I mean, I don't think I can ever remember seeing my divisional commander in the front line trench. I can't remember ever seeing one.
How far back was divisional headquarters?
Oh, probably, I should say 10 miles back in a chateau.
This is what we were talking about yesterday.
Yeah, there was great comfort. And one never saw one's superiors, except one battalion commander would see, but you never saw anybody above that, or very seldom. Well, then, the next day, we were still there on the ground, and the Germans did a very big counterattack over the same semicircle which we looked at the day before. This time the Germans came in mass formation, with several battalions at once, all massed together. They were immediately spotted by our forward observation officers, and a devastating artillery fire. I don't think any small arms fire was used at all, but a devastating artillery fire came down on these masses. It was right like Salisbury Plain with very big views. I mean, you saw these masses coming, and then the shells quickly pitched into these masses, and again they disintegrated, purely under shell fire. Well, then we were withdrawn from the line, and there were only 2 subalterns left, myself and another, and one became the commanding officer, and I became his adjutant. That's all we were.
And I'm especially asking you this because I've got a student working on Loos at the moment. Is there anything else that you would like to recall or can recall about this battle?
No, except, I mean, on my little bit of the front, where I think we were successful after the disastrous start of the gas. But of course, on the right, in the Highland, 15th Highland Division, they were very successful. They actually got into Loos and did very well. And one would have thought, you see, that if only the reinforcements had been on the spot and in fresh condition, it might have been a great success. But the reinforcements were arrived exhausted and never having seen the ground. I mean, it was foredoomed to failure, as one felt.
Well, you've said that the lessons of Aubers Ridge had appeared to be that high explosive was needed over a much longer period to destroy the trenches, and in fact high explosive had been used, and gas too, for Loos, but the reserves had not been in sufficient number and quickly enough to hand or well enough trained to exploit some degree of breakthrough that they'd got. Now, what lessons were learned from Loos, and were they employed?
None at all. I mean, the Battle of the Somme was really very similar to the Battle of Loos. The Battle of the Somme relied upon a most tremendous, concentrated preliminary bombardment, which again went on over a week, which was the hope that they would destroy the German defences. But the lesson had not been learned, that the German defences were, I mean, often 20, 30 feet underground, and there no amount of, artillery, even sort of had big stuff like 8-inch or 9-2 howitzer, had very little effect on deep dugout defences. And where the lines were 400 or 500 yards apart, as soon as the bombardment ceased, the German machine gunners had time to run up the stairs of their dugouts and man their machine guns with devastating effect. And that lesson had not been learned from Loos.
And in fact, some of the machine guns were on lifts,
yeah,
were they not, which kept them away from damage until they were required.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, that precisely what happened to the battles, or the initial day of the Battle of the Somme, which, as you know, was one of the biggest disasters in British military history.
20,000 killed in the day. 60,000 casualties.
60,000 casualties the first day. And when I went to the Somme, again, we went in the initial attack on the Somme, but we went to the Somme, and we went to Aubers, and we were billeted in Aubers for about 2 days. And I remember the second day I was there, one of my subalterns, we walked up the Aubers Palm Road to look at a village called La Boisselle, where